Hello, everyone. It is that Weems guy, and wow, we're here for episodes 2 weeks in a row. It's just madness. We're starting a new trend of being able to get episodes out twice in a row. I'm shocked at how this has happened. Joining me tonight, the Suited Shootist. Alex, how you doing?
Doing all right, Lee. Appreciate you having me back on the show.
Sure, if you would introduce yourself again to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Alex Sansone. I am known to the extent that I am in the gun space as the Suited Shootist, and basically, my focus is talking about the overlooked social considerations of an armed lifestyle, and I talk about everything from my interactions professionally and socially with non-gun people while being armed, as well as basically my two big claims to fame are I yell at people on the internet to pull their pants up, and I've been fired from a job for violating company weapons policy. So that's my little corner of the space.
Yeah, it's. I think that's one thing that just gets completely overlooked in this whole training community, firearms community that we all kind of walk around in. Is one is that we tend to think that everybody's like us, even though we know they aren't. And it's easy to say you got to be carrying this gun, this piece of equipment, all this kind of stuff, when you won't get fired if you get caught with that job. I get paid to carry a gun. They're not going to get upset with me if I get caught with a gun at work.
Right. You might get
You
upset with you
know,
if you get caught without a gun at work.
yeah, that's actually an issue if well, it depends on what I'm doing.
Yeah,
Depends on what I'm doing. I don't work in a setting with a jail anymore, but you don't take a firearm into the jail. Um, if I am doing scenarios, we don't take live firearms into
100%.
scenarios. That is an absolute no. Uh,
It's made the news more than once. So yeah, I know where
yeah,
you're coming from there.
it is so easy to screw that up. That
Yeah,
there are just certain times with my job, even when I'm involved in situations that I'm not required to take the gun off, there are now certain times where I'm going and locking it up and securing it just because I don't want to take the risk of it getting mixed up.
I get
And
it.
it could easily happen. And I'm not doing that. But by the same token, as we also have to provide security overwatch for some of the stuff that we do. And so we're getting to some things where like you're staying armed, but you're going over there. You're not
I
going to be
gotcha.
actively involved in this stuff. But I don't want to get too far down that money trail. It's we've talked about this kind of on the show before, but previously it doesn't ever hurt to rehash it. If you have a real honest to goodness job that is not part of this culture whatsoever, the stakes, how do you balance this? I need to have the tools at hand to defend myself and protect myself, but I've got to be able to make a house payment. I've got to be
Hmm.
gainfully employed. And you know what? If you get fired from this big box store, it's really not hard to go across the road and get hired at the next big box store. But if
Hmm.
you're in a very specialized industry, it may be hard to get hired again.
Yeah, I mean,
You may lose licensure or whatever.
hmm um, a a mutual friend of ours
Hmm.
in his industry, um, specifically if he were to catch a felony charge, that would detonate his entire, like he would lose all the licenses that he has to
Hmm.
conduct business in the industry in which he works.
Right.
And the irony of it is that he is, for all intents and purposes, self-employed, but because of the industry and the practices and the standards that they're held to, you know, it's not necessarily quite that easy. I know you've had DB on the show before, and
Yeah.
that's one of his sticking points is anytime someone says, well, just, you can just disregard everything else they're about to say because it is based in nothing but fantasy.
Right. You know, that little 5-shot J frame
Hmm.
may be suboptimal for completing all the drills in a particular popular class.
Hmm.
Um, But it may be the most practical thing for you to carry if carrying a firearm is even practical at all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Early.
nobody's getting a 125 at Rogers with a revolver.
Right.
Um, but in the same vein, that's where people tend to get it wrong. Is it's like it's not necessarily that you're picking between a Keltec 32 or a snub J frame and a Glock 19. You're picking
Hmm.
between that and nothing.
Yeah.
And it's that other side of the scale. And that is where I think a lot of folks lose sight of it, because oddly enough, I was actually a gun guy first. My first job out of college, when I moved to Houston, I was working at one of the bigger gun shops here for a couple of years, and then realized that hourly sales associate was not necessarily a long-term prospect. And so when I had to then transition into the corporate world to start looking at an actual career path, that is when a lot of this stuff started to clash. Because the reality is that Houston is kind of squarely in the middle. You've got people that are aggressively pro 2A, and then you've got folks that are on the other side of the political spectrum as well. But firearms are not a taboo subject here. Especially given the proximity in the Gulf Coast in general.
Mhm.
There's such a large sporting community that between duck and deer hunting and upland game, um, firearms at large are not a taboo subject. But even amongst those spaces, the idea of carrying a
Mhm.
firearm regularly for defensive purposes can still be somewhat alien to people.
Yep.
The even the majority of gun owners that I've encountered from just my time, again, socially at professional networking functions,
Mhm.
and my time working a gun counter, the kind of the average run of the mill thought process is the one that we collectively tend to laugh at, of, oh well, I'm only going to carry a gun if I'm going somewhere where I think I might need it.
Mhm.
um, but that's
Yeah.
how a large portion of our allies view our lifestyle.
When you say they're not against the idea of firearms,
Hmm.
I think as you're saying that too, is they have a different view of what firearms means than what we do.
Hmm.
They have a shotgun at home to go shoot sporting clays or trap with, or
Hmm.
they might go out and call themselves dove hunting once every couple of years,
Hmm.
or they have a rifle to shoot deer with, or
And
something along those
interestingly
lines.
enough,
That's what they think, or they've got a handgun in the nightstand.
hmm, yeah,
I'm not anti-gun. I own a gun.
hmm,
That's different than what the world that most of the people that would listen or watch this show
yeah.
are in. And
Well, and
I think, go ahead.
the reality of it is that most of the folks that I've interacted with that have that approach, it's simply because their life experience up to this point hasn't shown them a need for it.
Mhm.
And if you're talking to someone who's made it 35, 40 plus years without being directly confronted by criminal violence, you can show them all the statistics and all the news stories in the world, but
Yep.
it is in direct conflict to literally decades of their life experience. And
Oh yeah.
so it's a matter of finding the way to make the material relevant, as opposed to just sort of bludgeoning them over the head with moral righteousness until they come around to see things your way.
Yeah, I grew up in a household in which we had guns.
Yeah.
I fired my first shot from an actual firearm at the age of 6. We could walk outside and do it where I grew up. Matter of fact, that's
Hmm.
exactly what we did. Um, I grew up in a very, very, very extended family. Everyone that I could see from where I lived, I was related to.
Hmm.
And so I had cousins that lived in the neighboring houses and across the road and everything like that. And it was nothing for all of us boys to gather up everybody to take a 22 or a shotgun and go in the woods and go calling ourselves hunting. Usually we just walk around with the guns and get bored, start shooting pine cones or something like that, making too much noise.
Hmm.
But we grew up in a world that, preteen boys walking around with guns was not considered abnormal for us. That was
Yeah.
our normal. Um, to, graduating from high school, having a job, everything, I had firearms,
Hmm.
but I wasn't, quote, and I considered myself a gun person because
Yeah.
would read about the gun magazines and stuff like that, but I wasn't in this lifestyle of the daily carry on my person,
Hmm.
etc.
Yeah.
Even when I went to the police academy at the age of 27, uh, I kind of had this mindset of I'm in a town of more than 100,000 people, which to me is huge compared to where I grew up at.
Hmm.
Um, I'm in this town of more than 100,000 people. Nobody's going to recognize me when I'm off duty. Carrying the gun on my person off duty is not really that big of a deal
Hmm.
until, you know, made my first arrest out of FTO, go to court on that arrest, go out to dinner that night, and at the very next table, guess who was sitting there? The guy who just lost his job because he got convicted of the charge for which I arrested him. And
It's hard to make friends in that line of work.
I have not left my house unarmed since.
Hmm.
I hardly will even leave. Yeah, I don't even go to the mailbox without having
Yeah.
something now.
Well, and that actually highlights a very good point that I think
Mhm.
is kind of another one of the major disconnects within the space, because
Yeah.
given that there is such a high concentration of former military and former law enforcement in the instructor pool,
Mhm.
the overall risk profile that y'all are accustomed to
Yep.
is just a little bit higher. I'm
Mhm.
fortunate enough that, to the best of my knowledge, at least, there's nobody out in the world that's looking to do me harm by name. So,
Right.
as such, that just means that really, as long as I don't look like food, I'm pretty good to go.
Yeah.
Um, but folks like you, folks, that are coming out of some of the tier one units where there are fatwas on their head and stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
it's that other side of being on one of those most wanted posters. And so
Mhm.
from a standpoint like that, the idea of legitimately having to carry a full size fighting gun at all times is a much more realistic proposition.
Mhm.
But, I'm a suburban, yuppie white collar professional. So as long as I manage to not run afoul of some over caffeinated soccer mom or some dude that's just having a real bad day,
Mhm.
the math is different, and that's one of the spots where I think, especially when you look at the influx of brand new gun owners over the last several years, when there is, because I know that it's kind of a sore point even amongst some of the folks that we both know, in terms of the stupid human tricks that are popular on Instagram, and
Mhm.
those becoming the the benchmark of competency,
Yeah.
which there's always going to be that portion of people who they see the top levels of human performance and they find it inspirational, and there's always going to be that dude that's watching the bull rider going, I know I'm not going to make the whole 8 seconds, and I know I'm probably going to get hurt, but I'm wondering what my time would be. And then there are the people going, absolutely freaking not.
Mhm.
And that is one of the things that I try and put out as a counterpoint is, if the focus is always so heavily fixated on the top level performance, and that is what is aggressively consumed by a majority of the market,
Mhm.
that's what's going to be seen on social media and all this other stuff, which means that is what new people to the space are going to be presented with. And sure, it's going to motivate some of them, it's going to turn off a whole lot more to where instead of them becoming an active participant in this armed lifestyle, that pistol is
Yeah.
simply going to, sit in that
Yeah.
sock drawer and never get touched again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing people in our lifestyle is that we have learned, we have already accepted that there's evil out there. We
Mm-hmm.
have started training to learn what it looks like, because I got to tell you, you know, how I see the world now compared to how I saw it 25 years ago. Because I just had last week, I had my 25th anniversary of the badge.
Mm-hmm.
Places that I used to go as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I grew up in a little small community that was 45 minutes away from one of the larger cities in Georgia. And we would go there on the weekends. Like, because if you want to go to a movie, something like that, that's where you had to go.
Mm-hmm.
And back when I was growing up, my parents would let me drive there, once I knew how to get there. What's the big deal?
Yeah.
You know, and now I go back to that same area sometimes. Like, I hadn't been to it in years, and my itinerant ways took me through there not too long ago, and I was like, oh my word, my parents actually let me walk around here, one, by myself,
Mm-hmm.
and two, unarmed, because I wasn't easy as heavily stacked as I was, because I'm overlooking, okay, I see a hand-to-head and drug deal taking place right over there. I see a guy looking for a car to break into and everything else. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I can't believe that I thought this was normal and I didn't notice that stuff before.
No.
And it's just my whole view on all that has changed. And so I just, I'm trying to now go back and look at things like, how would someone who doesn't see the world like I do see them?
Mm-hmm.
But as your point on like the performer stuff, there is nothing wrong, folks, with wanting to get better skill wise.
Yeah.
And if you decide that being a master in IDPA or chasing, master or A class or grandmaster in USPSA is something you aspire to, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's admirable. Go do it. But that's not everything that goes into the equation.
And that's one of the things that I really appreciate being able to like. I've had some conversations with guys like Mike Green, guys like Cliff
Mm-hmm.
Byerly, who they squarely have a foot in both camps of
Yeah.
they've done the thing for real and they've
Mm-hmm.
also spent time competing at a very high level. And what I appreciate about them is that they're able to articulate what value actually comes from the
Mm-hmm.
ownership of a high degree of skill. Um, but again, talking with a friend of mine who is a very highly accomplished shooter in multiple different arenas. Yeah, just some of the conversations we've had over drinks. He goes, "Yeah, dude, honestly, it's not worth it. Like,
Yep.
once you're about here, everything else beyond that is just kind of either bragging rights or testing your
Yeah.
own limitations, but from a practical applicable standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
um you know go work on your deadlift, go work,
Yeah.
go work on your ability to talk to people, um go work on your relationships,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And so it's always finding, and it's one of those things. You don't see a whole bunch of power lifters in the UFC because the the goals and the demands are very different between the two. And so you just got to find out where the priorities lie for the individual and go from there. Because if you're truly going to be multidisciplinary, I mean, I'll tell you, it's just because it's what I've been doing most recently. Lifting 3 days a week and jujitsu 2 days a week, that's not just 5 hours out of my week.
Mm-hmm.
Collectively, once you factor in commute, recovery, supplementation, and everything else, I mean, that is a good chunk out of your day. And that's just for, almost what constitutes preventative maintenance. Um, Before you even
Yeah.
start getting into gun stuff. And there are folks that'll, scoff at, oh, you only dry fire 5 minutes twice a week, scrub.
Yeah.
It's better than nothing.
Yeah. One of the tip of the spear tier one communities has determined Um, well, I'm going to quote John Hearn because I'm going to trust that John is telling me the truth. John's actually read the study and done all the stuff.
Hmm.
Uh, that basically anything above USPSA B class, which would be what about the equivalent to IDPA master, I think, um, or thereabouts.
Hmm.
Once you hit that, you've pretty much like everything beyond that's kind of diminishing return.
Yeah.
And so if you can hit that skill level and maintain it, quite frankly, once you get to that skill level, it's not that hard to maintain.
Hmm.
Now, it's very easy to lose it and degrade, but it's not that
Hmm.
hard to maintain.
Right.
Um, you need to be working on other things. And, I've got a professional requirement that I have to meet within a particular time frame that quite frankly, that if I had been spending time in the gym or more time walking around the neighborhood, the
Hmm.
subdivision type things, instead of driving overnight to get back from a shooting class to get back to work, everything, I'd be better off right now.
Yeah. And it's, that's it, is that it's keeping that competency wheel as, as
Mhm.
in round as possible. And it's interesting because whether you're talking about the 1% of us that pursue, continuing education beyond our state
Mhm.
minimum carry permit requirement,
Yep.
or whether you get even more granular to the folks that are looking to hit master or GM level shooting, or whether you've got the folks that are looking to, uh, you know, get a black belt in jujitsu or a
Mhm.
500-pound deadlift, or whatever the thing is.
Right.
Um, Once you dedicate an appreciable amount of your time to it, then it just becomes. I, I was talking with my mother about just why I started strength training, and over the course, she's like, "Well, do you like?" It's like, "No, it's freaking awful. I hate every minute of it." It's like, "Well, why do you do it?" It's like, "Because it's better than constantly getting hurt in jujitsu." And a bunch of my jujitsu friends said, "Hey, dude, you probably ought to lift some barbells because that'll help you not get hurt as much." It's like, "Oh, okay. Well, this sucks, but getting hurt sucks, so it's going to suck either way."
Mhm.
And it's just, we've all heard the expression, it's amazing what you can get used to, but it's true. And the baseline, there is no such thing as normal. There isn't, because again, every community and every sort of subculture is going to have their own definition of it. The number of times that people have scoffed at the idea that the theorem switchback, the little tail cap attachment for flashlights, will draw somebody's attention. People legitimately think that that is a laughable proposition, when, no lie, in one of my office jobs, I had that flashlight sticking out of my pocket. Not only did somebody ask me what it was, without any prompting, they volunteered that they thought it was an impact weapon because it had a ring and it was pointy on the end. Like, that's good information to have.
Mhm.
So, the idea that it is this just completely innocuous thing, or that people don't notice, the reality is that all of us that are walking around the planet today are doing so because our ancestors got real good at pattern recognition. Because, back when we were the subject of the attention of apex predators
Mhm.
and we weren't the top of the food chain, if you're wandering around, the savannas or the plains or whatever, hey, that doesn't look right, probably is what keeps you alive. And there's some of that that's just so baked in that it gets dismissed because people notice a lot. And it goes back to what Dr. April talked about in terms of thin slicing, and just a matter of, the normalcy bias and understanding what you can actually ignore. But people ignore more than they arguably should, but doesn't mean it doesn't register.
If along that line of what people recognize, I think we should point out that people may see something and notice it or even recognize it and not say anything, but it doesn't mean they didn't notice or recognize it and not say anything.
Precisely.
As the wave of appendix inside the waistband carry, this latest wave of it began to take steam, and people began adopting it because on this, when the magic timer comes out and everything, they were able to shave a quarter of a second off their presentation, etc.
Hmm.
Dang it, I've been trying to break myself for saying etc. so much, and I just did it. Uh, I have spotted more people carrying concealed or think they're carrying concealed that are carrying appendix than I ever spotted carrying strong side hip.
Hmm.
More people in the last few years I have spotted it than I have combined all the years prior to that.
Yeah.
And I just don't bring that up often and don't mention it to people because I just don't want to have the argument because they're not going to believe me. And, people have this emotional thing. Guys, when you're walking into the wind and it is blowing against you and it blows back against your body, your shirt takes the pattern of anything. And I have spotted more pistol grips
Yep.
that way than I
Hmm.
ever spotted.
Well, and that actually goes back to it's a theory that I have because there's absolutely no
Mm-hmm.
way to prove it. But because the performance metrics are such a popular topic of conversation within,
Mm-hmm.
the internet gun space, I can't help but shake the idea that it is like it's basically subconsciously encouraging people to carry larger guns than are actually appropriate for their needs and context
Mm-hmm.
because they are the easiest to get the requisite scores with
Mm-hmm.
to evaluate capability. Um, and so, there in the filter concealment workshop, there's not a week that goes by where you don't have some very slight framed individual that is trying to shoehorn a legit full size duty gun into their waistband and is lamenting the struggles that they're having with concealment. It's like, yeah, because you're trying to do it on hard mode, homie. I mean, don't get
Mm-hmm.
me wrong, it is a whole lot easier. Like it is a lot easier for me to shoot my Glock 19 than it is my 365X. But is the delta a substantial enough impact to then justify all of the accommodations that have to be made for it to come along? And of course, the answer is always depends because
Yeah.
sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. If I'm going to the movies, for example, yeah, the Glock's probably coming with me. But if I'm going to, I don't know, farmers market, 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning in suburban, in the suburbs outside of Houston, I'm willing to play the odds a little bit there because chances are I'm probably the only one there with a gun at all.
Yeah.
Um, but again, it's a
Well,
matter
the
of,
only one there with a gun legally.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure that occasionally the odd felon gets an itch for the you know artisan handcrafted shaken latte or whatever. So,
Yeah.
um, but typically my understanding is early Sunday mornings are not their preferred hunting time.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, and that's it. And the what's interesting about all this is I very vividly remember this is probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point because I'm fortunate enough to know a lot of people in this space that are shooting at an incredibly high level. Uh, Having heard a couple of them speak somewhat critically of their own performance, they describe it as like, yeah, I'm an okay shot, and they are light years ahead of where I was at the time. They still are. Um, it literally put me into this kind of existential crisis. I was like, all right, well, this guy that's infinitely better than me is saying that he's just okay. What the hell kind of chance do I have?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, am I literally just fodder waiting for the wrong predator to come along? And after a conversation with a friend who is a little bit more steeped in outlaw culture than I am, uh, like, dude, you know what? There are completely untrained grandmas that have prevailed with a Jennings 25, and there are dudes on the government payroll with hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment and millions of dollars of training that get got by an illiterate goat herd with an AK
Mm-hmm.
that's older than either of us.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes your number is just up. And so it's like at the end of the day, if you're wrong, it ain't your problem anymore.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of it comes down to recognition,
Hmm.
um, luck. As much as I hate to say it,
Hmm.
that is the thing. And yeah, as Tom Givens would say, who started the fight versus who started the contact.
Hmm.
Okay, I am not a USPSA grandmaster, but I hazard to guess that if I was doing the old high noon thing and I went first,
Hmm.
they're not going to get me. Now, we're
Yeah.
probably going to get both get got because Dave Spalding proved that over and over and over and over and over again in some of his classes.
Hmm.
But if I decide to start the fight, I'm going to win the fight. If someone else decides to start the fight with me, they're probably going to win the fight.
Hmm.
It's and a lot of times in the gun fight thing is who gets the first shots in the important meaty bits
Yep.
typically wins, and that has nothing to do with the speed of the presentation. Well,
Hmm.
it may have something to do with the speed of presentation, but
It
that's
can
not
be a
that.
factor.
But
Yeah.
that's not the ultimate thing. Um, in the last show we were talking about last episode talking about the importance of different things in training for baby cops. I am ecstatic when I can get presentations from a level 3 holster in a cadet or a trainee to 1.75 or
Hmm.
faster. I am just absolutely ecstatic when I can get them to that. That would not win anything on the competition circuit. People in the class are, that cop over there's got a 1.75 presentation. Let me
Hmm.
see you do it from level 3, Scooter.
Well, and,
And
and and not only that, but it's really
yeah,
interesting because one of Craig Douglas's reels that came across my feed today, he was going a little bit deeper into the pre-assault cues,
yeah.
and he actually pulled in one of his alumni that was a student there who's a cop, and if you were to watch the video on mute without knowing anything about pre-assault indicators, the initial reaction from the average normal person would be, why did he jump? Like, why did he go hands on with that guy? Like, it was so, unwarranted. Um, when you go back and watch it and you know what you're looking for, while the cues were subtle, it was enough of it's like, okay, something's fixing to jump off. And so it was an interdiction of the action as opposed to a response to it.
Yeah.
And it's that's one of those pieces where from some of the drills that they've done in both Craig's classes and Cecil's, um, the number of folks that have a hard time doing talky stuff and physical stuff simultaneously,
Hmm.
apparently it's practically a superpower,
Yeah.
um, which is just lost on me because I don't know whether it's the ADD or whether it's just because of the time that I've spent in sales, but I'm able to have a full conversation while also doing something completely different, um, and just be able to keep track of those two things parallel in my mind. But watching folks during some of these drills either just completely vapor lock or have to finish their sentence before they're able to execute an action, it's like that right there is probably something that you might want to start chipping away at because
Hmm.
that's easily 3/4 of a second before you can start your draw time.
Yep.
And it's that
Task
whole sooner, not
fixation
faster.
is a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. That's why we teach people when they're giving verbal commands to use short, no more than 2-word commands.
Hmm.
Because if you load up a complete sentence into your brain and you
Hmm.
start to deliver that sentence and the situation changes before your eyes, so many people are going to finish that complete sentence. So that complete thought they had in their head before they react or respond, to reaction and responding are two different things. Before they react or respond to what they're actually seeing in front of them, even if their brain picked up on it.
Yeah. And like, granted, the last time I took Cecil's class was a year or two
Mhm.
ago, so it's been a minute. But from memory, like I'm the only person that was like hitting somebody in the middle of a sentence,
Yeah. And
and that was responding to
yeah.
their, the other person's behavior. Um, and so, but again, the whole idea of people spending their time and money to pursue this recreationally,
Mhm.
again, is such an alien concept. I forget who it was that ran the math, but for a 2-day class, when you factor in tuition, ammunition, lodging, and food and transportation, you're in it for the better part of 2 grand per class.
Mhm.
And so, the number of people that have $2,000 of completely disposable income, let alone, 4, 6, 8 outside of, now if they're unencumbered, they're single, and, this is
Mhm.
just what they do is their thing. Cool, awesome. But
Yeah.
when you've got, you know, multiple, you've got either a spouse, possibly kids, you're juggling vacation time, sick time, and all this other stuff.
Mhm.
The idea of the perpetual student, um, while again is a goal that we should all pursue, is not necessarily a truly accessible proposition to the majority of even active gun carriers.
Yeah.
And so finding a way to to make that material as accessible as possible and encourage continuing education as opposed to, shaming and dogging on them as
Yeah.
being lazy or uncommitted or not wanting to do the work, um, I think is a big area of opportunity within the space, because um, even some really high level instructors that I'm friends with, and I really like their material, their value proposition isn't there, because it's like, this is what I can do, and this is what I can help you do. It's like, okay, if people are able to connect the dots and understand why that's important, they'll sign up for the class.
Mhm.
But I think the piece that tends to be missing on a lot of this is, and here's why it's relevant to you.
Yeah.
It's just this sort of assumed, um, this assumed thing. And if we can find ways to better tie it back to the average um, civilian defender, then it's going to be a lot easier to get people excited about it. It's going to make it seem a whole lot less abnormal, and it's going to start getting a higher percentage of involvement, which I then think really has the opportunity to truly normalize all of this, in
Mhm.
a way that other attempts to normalize gun carrying have sort of missed the boat on.
Yeah, and it also strikes me as this other thing is it comes up frequently as a topic of conversation. Be well rounded. You need your
Mhm,
medical training, this kind of stuff. And certain classes out there don't sell because the round count isn't high enough for what people
mhm,
consider. And even though they're getting more information in the same amount of time than they would in a live fire class,
mhm,
if there's not a shooting trophy at the end of it, as Brian Easter to call it Pokemon, range Pokemon, or something like that, if there's not something like that drawing people in,
mhm,
the class doesn't sell.
mhm,
And um, that's one of the things from the business perspective of being a traveling instructor or even a local instructor trying to, keep it going in a certain area is you've got to
yep,
get the people through the door. Okay.
mhm,
That's how I've been able to finance a lot of the stuff that I've done in the
yeah,
training world as a student is I had a business or have a business that has financially supported it. If I wanted to go to a class, well, then I taught a class to get the money to go.
mhm,
And okay, so I'm going to drop X amount of money to go take this class somewhere. It
mhm,
wasn't a big deal because the business that was money came into the business that paid off for it and it was a tax write off. and I
Hmm.
didn't have to pay taxes on that money that I made from that. And that's how I financed doing it. Had I not had that, I would not have been able to have taken a lot of the training that I've taken. Had I not worked in a career field that supported that with an employer that
Hmm.
supported it, for instance, um, I went to the SIG Academy's pistol mounted opposite constructor course. It was during the week. So I went and that counted as 2 work days for me.
Hmm.
I grabbed a case of ammo out of the ammo room and I used points to pay for actually the business paid for the hotel room. And
Hmm.
so I went to this class that, as you say, your $X amount for the average class cost me $300 to go to that the business paid for.
Yep.
And I was able to, and I won the range Pokemon from the class too. So yay!
Yeah.
So for me, it wasn't a huge investment.
Hmm.
Now, if that was one of their open enrollment classes on a Saturday, Sunday weekend that you'd have to travel and go to a hotel room and buy the case of ammo and everything else, I see where that's a deterrent for people to go. So it's one of the reasons why I made the decision with my business when traveling is I quit doing, for the most part, uh, 2 day classes.
Hmm.
I do
You
two
do two one-day
one day,
classes that can
two
be
1 day
done
class.
back.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
And
do
that's,
2 1 day classes, and one of them is like if I can make enough money off of this 1 day class to cover all of my expenses and everything, then the other one's pure profit. I consider it a successful, from a business perspective, weekend.
yep.
And what I have found uh, when I switched to that model, my revenue actually went up because
Yep.
people that couldn't do the whole 2 day weekend thing,
It's more
whatever,
accessible.
and I can come to the Sunday class, but I can't come on Saturday because Junior's got a soccer game,
Yep.
or my daughter's got this thing, or my wife wants to go to a Christmas party or something like that. Or my husband's off doing something and I can't come. You know, they could come on Saturday, but they weren't going to miss church on Sunday, or they could come on Sunday because they had something. It's amazing how much that freed up people. Now, still get people that come to both days,
Yeah.
but it's amazing. I've been trying to tell some of the other instructors, like, hey, look, I know you got this great 2 day class. So if you can
The
break
people
it
that are
into,
going to come to 2-day classes are going to sign up whether it's offered as a 2-day class or not. But
yeah.
there's going to be a whole lot more people that will be attracted to a 1-day class and, might just kind of dip their toe in the water,
Mm-hmm.
or that's literally all they can swing. I shamelessly stole the model from Carl Wren,
Mm-hmm.
in that the very sort of limited curriculum that I've put together that I'm teaching here locally,
Yeah.
it's quite literally geared towards people who are like thinking that they might need a gun and have no idea what the hell to do.
Yeah.
Um, it's 4-hour blocks,
Mm-hmm.
and they're interchangeable. And I've got, it's like you start with handgun essentials because that's how to not be a liability with a firearm,
Yep.
and then we can kind of branch off on the others depending on what interests you and what your needs are. But at the very least, it's a 4-hour crash course on you know the four universal rules of safe gun handling, and then basic manual of arms, and then some rough expectations of, if you go to an indoor range, here's what to expect. If you go to an outdoor range, here's what to expect. If you go to a class, here's what to expect. Here are some of the red flags to look out
Yeah.
for, because there are so many people that are gun curious,
Yep.
but do not have they don't have a foot in the door yet. And, you know, like it or not, representation matters. And so if there is not somebody that is teaching the material that either looks like them or has at least a reasonably parallel life experience to them, then you have to, at the very least, have some kind of pre-existing relationship or be approachable enough
Mm-hmm.
to where you've got someone who is a effective stranger going, hey, I'm really uncomfortable, I don't know what I'm doing, and I need your help. So It's for those of us that have been around guns for any period of time. Again, all this stuff is second nature, and it's just so obvious that we can't fathom um, anybody not thinking, "Oh, I should learn about this." But there is a very large consumer pool out there that needs the help and kind of wants to be welcomed in.
Yep.
But um, again, it's one of those where just a degree of understanding and empathy, because that's one of the things that when I was early on in sort of my trajectory, hell, when I was in high school is kind of when I really started getting into guns. um I was that aggressively proselytizing shall not be infringed, and just sort of beating people over the head with talking points, and you know didn't really make any headway. So once I got to college, and three of the people in my social circle, one of them was from Greenwich Village, Manhattan, one of them was from Long Island, and one of them was from LA and went to Burning Man with her mother every year. None of these three, and all of them were female, so none of these three women um, had ever been in the same zip code as a firearm, let alone
Mhm.
had any interest in them. But, because we were friends and because it was an interest of mine, uh, I invited them along to a range trip once, and just once they saw and got exposed to firearms in a responsible recreational capacity, they're like, oh, okay. It's not all these crazy foaming at the mouth zealots who are like, doomsday preppers. And so the like it or not, there is this caricature of gun owners that we have to be cognizant of, and we have to actively work to overcome, because anything that we do that plays into that stereotype, all it will do is then immediately bolster the bias of folks who genuinely don't know any better, because they don't know any gun owners. And so all they have access to in terms of who we are, how we think, how we operate is whatever version of the narrative they have access to through their preferred channels of information, whether that be cable news, whether it be the internet, what have you. And so, yeah, you can sit back and laugh being stupid and sheep and all this other stuff, or you can go, okay, fun fact, that's not all of us. Hey, here's something you didn't think about. Here's something cool that I can show you. And you just might think it's neat, as opposed to, ha ha, you stupid defenseless sheep. How dare you not value your own safety?
And that's another thing that goes along with that, is that the hobbyists, we want the latest in gun, the latest in gear. You know, you've got to have this, X brand pistol with this optic on it. I was kind of saying we
Mm-hmm.
run the price of entry up to a point that we're
Mm-hmm.
pricing people out of it, and they just basically they shrug their shoulders and just, well, I just can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't afford to do that. Or they go and someone tell you got to be able to do this skill to this level, everything, and then they just, well, we'll walk away.
Yeah. It's like, I haven't needed it up till now, so clearly it could be that important.
Right.
So cool. See
Yeah.
ya. And again, that's value is inherently subjective.
Yeah.
There are people that look at me crazy because between the actual machine and grinder, my coffee setup for my morning coffee
Hmm.
costs as much as a Glock. And here's the thing: in the world of espresso machines, that ain't expensive.
Yeah.
Like that's the budget route. But there are people like, I don't care if it's hot and black and caffeinated, I'll drink it.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's a matter of, depending on what the thing is, the consumer is going to have a certain degree of sophistication. They're going to have a certain
Hmm.
depth of understanding. You know, um, uh, Kirk Clark is a friend of mine,
Hmm.
and I took him to this menswear shop in Dallas after TACCON last year. Him and his brother both, and I had his brother try this sports jacket on. He fell in love with it instantly. And then he saw the price tag and he has not forgiven me yet because he didn't buy it, but I have ruined him because he's like, oh my God, I understand why this is so expensive, but I
Yeah.
cannot justify spending four figures on a jacket.
Yeah.
It's like, hey man, you know what? But it's a hell of a lot nicer than what you get at the Dillard's.
Yeah.
Um, and so for the entry level gun owner, they don't need the performance package. They need something that is going to work, that is going to be robust, and you know, yeah, we turn our noses up at Taurus and all the other budget entry level stuff. When the reality is that it's a hell of a lot better than at least from what I've been told, the entry level stuff was 20 years ago.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
It's funny. Whatever and when I say we, I'm talking about people, decide is important to us, we find
hmm
the way to spend the money and do whatever we want to. And that's when we don't
hmm
find it that. Um, Back in my patrol cop days, I spent a lot of time on midnight shift. Well, when you're off on midnight shift and you're used to being awake all night long, and your off days are like Wednesday night and Thursday night, there's not a whole lot to do because I'm not a party guy. I'm not going to the bars and all that kind of stuff. I
sure.
got really into uh, sorry, my phone went off with something over here. I got really into barbecue, like cooking
hmm
my own barbecue. Yeah, and folks, I know there are some of you out there that lives in part of the country where putting a hot dog on a grill, they're talking about going to barbecue. No, that is
hmm
no. If you've ever used BBQ, you don't know what barbecue is. Okay, that's no.
Yeah.
And there's a difference. Barbecue is a process. It is not an activity. If you're cooking hamburgers and hot dogs, you're having a cookout. You're not having a barbecue. And I'm sorry, I'll get off my soapbox over here.
Oh no, I'm right there with you.
And so I spent a crazy amount of money. All of a sudden I went out one day and I realized I had 9 different grills because I
Wow.
would buy this grill to cook this thing, and or
hmm
buy this piece of equipment to do another one. And my graduation present to myself for finishing my master's program was a big green egg. And it stays in my garage. And I would like when I would be off on midnight shift, I'd roll it out into the driveway
Yep.
and I'd spend all night long sitting out there tending that thing, cooking on it and everything. And so about lunch the next day, I had like some masterful piece of something that I had cooked and I'd eat lunch. Oh, that was good. That was a fun night. And I'd go to bed and get up and go to work. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
my job changed and I quit doing that, but I still got a garage full of grills and I've given some of them away and the like since then.
Yeah.
But just to clean out space.
Yeah.
But we're no different than the person that gets into golf
Yeah.
and buys a new driver every month because it may give them 10 more feet on their drive. Or I understand Jeep people are very high end on the
hmm
consumer market and the like. It's no different. We all fall into that same trap.
Yeah.
And it is always just tickles me to be at one of these gun classes and see someone shoving a Glock 34 with a weapon mounted light and a pistol mounted optic and a compensator because the
hmm
awesome recoil of a 9mm handgun is so hard, so fierce that you can't control it, down the front of their pants, and then they're
hmm
dropping a shirt over it. You can see the whole outline of everything, and they're calling themselves concealed. And then I beat them with a 19 with iron sights.
Yeah. That's and that's again,
Yeah.
it's just
Of course, I've been the last couple of years. I will admit I've been very heavy into the optic thing because I was trying to get
Mhm.
ahead of the trend and everything. But even back in those days,
Yeah.
um, it was it just still is funny to me. Now I will say to the audience, I have finally crossed over. Um, my employer, my issued firearm now has an optic on it, and my options are to be employed and carry this gun or be employed and carry what I want to.
Nice.
Be unemployed. And so, Yes, now I'm carrying a gun with an optic on it. Now it is exactly the setup I would have chosen. So I'm okay with it. I'm cool with it. And hey,
That's
bosses, if
my
you listen to this, I like the choice. Thank you for letting me pick between the two setup options. Yay, I'm happy. Um, because I've got a gun that I own personally, just like it, that I had set up I just never had crossed over. Um, but there's really not a whole lot of appreciable differences. Although Hearn gets mad at me when I've beaten him here lately several times. You have 20% more advantage in your equipment because Hearn knows what the percentage is. John, you picked what you were carrying.
Of course he does. Yeah.
Yeah,
Nerd.
you picked what you were carrying.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I waited a whole lot longer than I probably should have to switch over to a dot. And honestly, for
Mhm.
me, the articulable difference is I have to think less.
Yeah,
Like it, and it's my eyes don't cooperate well together,
yeah,
anyways. Um, so reducing the number of things that have to be focused on, it
yeah,
requires less RAM, and so for me, it makes more sense.
yeah.
And the couple of new shooters that I've put a dot in there, I put a dot gun in their hand. It's been a similar experience, but I immediately cautioned, was like, look, from this point, yeah, it makes the shooting process easier. But
Hmm.
getting to this point is
Yep.
so much less forgiving that
Hmm.
it's going to take a lot more work to get consistent.
Yeah.
So you just got to figure out, which route you want to take. But it was it was a bit of a crystallizing moment for me, and it's interesting because another one of those very popular mantras of, you know, don't be lazy, shoot a stock gun until you can outshoot it, yada yada yada,
Hmm.
extended my process longer than it needed to, because I was resisting any modification because I thought I hadn't earned the right to modify my
Hmm.
gun until it was good enough yet. But then after taking a class where the instructor, who was a friend of mine, actually literally gave me permission, like, dude, you are a good enough shooter that if you feel like you've got certain preferences that you want to explore, you can do that. Like, oh, okay, cool. So try the dot. That helped. And then I've discovered that I vastly prefer a rolling kind of TDA style trigger over
Hmm.
something with a wall on it. And so, cool. I've made some minor adjustments to the trigger on my Glock so that it has a less of a hard wall break, and that's basically it. But again, it's one of those where the 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 mantras and the dogmas and all that kind of stuff, they wind up just getting so overused that the intent gets lost. And so, that's another one of those things where, especially once you start getting very specialized, what people say versus what they mean versus what's heard can be three completely different things. And it's like the whole idea of, like, well, you can never have too much skill, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, okay, conceptually, yes, because the more skill you have, the more, and whatever degradation you experience, well, the higher skill level you have, evidently you experience less degradation, and then at that point you are still performing at a higher level than the average person. Yes, cool, but none of that crap happens in a vacuum. And so
Yeah.
again, it's how much time and effort for skill development, how much time and effort for skill maintenance, and then you factor in all the various slices of the pie.
Yeah.
So, um, that's the big sticking point. And kind of bring it back full circle to what we're talking about in terms of just sort of normies and regular people. Um, it was another exchange that happened in the Filster workshop where, interestingly enough, it was on one of my videos where I was talking about how much concealment do you really need, and it's a sliding spectrum depending on circumstance. Um, One of the guys in there posted a video from John Lovell, who was talking about the merits of open carry. And I've never met John Lovell personally. A couple of people that I know him, have worked with him. Seems like a nice enough guy. I have a very difficult time if if there's somebody who, for the entirety of their adult life, has carried a gun under color of authority,
telling me
Yeah.
as a regular earth person with no credentials what does and doesn't work. And again, it's a matter of what normal is, because like you were saying at the beginning of the show, um, you're required as part of your job to carry a firearm. If I have a hard time envisioning any circumstance where you would be confronted like, hey, why do you have a gun on you?
Yeah.
Because of this right here, the shiny gold thing.
Yeah.
um and I don't have that luxury. I can't badge out of anything.
Yeah.
um and so it's just one of those where folks that have always been credentialed to be armed tend to lose sight of what the normal dynamics are amongst people that exist outside the gun space. Again, something that I talked about in the video. I was working for a commercial construction company in Texas. I mean, you want to talk about legit good old boys club. Like our project managers are dipping red man, and
Mhm.
every company car is a is a pickup truck. Good old boy type stuff. Nobody had a problem with gun ownership. Every every man in that office had a carry permit. Not a single one of them actually carried.
Yep.
Maybe one of them had it in the console of his truck, maybe. But the idea of actively concealed carrying on a regular basis
Yeah.
was just not a thought in their head. And so, even in such a friendly environment as that, there wouldn't have been any real, consequences and any real fallout if I had chosen to, carry at that workplace, unlike the previous one. But it would have drawn odd looks.
Yeah.
And even amongst the civilian defender crowd, the dismissal tends to be, it's like, oh, well, you know what? I don't have to justify myself to anybody. It's like, I have my carry permit. I'm within my rights, yada, yada, yada. I was like, I mean, that is a
Yeah.
factually correct statement, but it also completely loses sight of the fact there are plenty of folks that have gotten internet famous over fairly mild transgressions that
Mhm.
never needed to make the news, because either someone decided to dig their heels in on general principle, or uh, they could have simply exercised a little bit more care and thought and avoided the whole interaction entirely.
Yeah.
Because that's another one, is people get hemmed up on general principle quite a bit, and it's like,
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to. It's like, oh, yeah, you shouldn't, but you know the world isn't as it should be. The world is as it is. Again,
Yep.
to steal a line from Dr. April. And it's like, you can lament how things should be all you want, but we have to deal with the reality of where we're at.
Yeah. And your comment system just brought up something in my mind. I came really close here a couple of months ago from leaving the whole badge profession behind and moving to something corporate. And one of the things that gave me pause, and I'm glad the opportunity that came up that I accepted came up. One of the things that gave me pause was I cannot escape the gun sphere on the internet at this point in my life,
Mm-hmm.
because now if anybody Googles me,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to find it.
Yep.
And one of the corporate jobs I was looking at, and I got to looking at the culture of that company, is like all it's going to take is for me making somebody mad in the office one day and them Googling me
Mm-hmm.
and seeing this whole life that I've lived out there.
Yep.
And then I'm going to get fired over that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you know what? I'm going to stay in my world.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I found an opportunity that allowed me to stay in my world, but kind of leave the world I was in as well. And, it's, well, I want to go chase those Pokemons and those performance goals, and then post them all over our social media when we achieve them. And I've done it,
Yeah.
done it. That's maybe the albatross that follows you around.
It can be. I mean, there's a reason why it wasn't until probably about the last year or so that I was comfortable actually having my name associated with the Suited Shootist. I was trying to
Mhm.
keep that as
Mhm.
reasonably anonymous as possible,
Yeah.
to avoid that kind of cross contamination. Now, thankfully, after my time with the Firearms Policy Coalition and now working with GAT Marketing, uh, obviously I've got a bit more latitude there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's less of an issue. But
Right.
it's yeah, it's a very polarizing thing for some people,
Mhm.
and you can gnash your teeth about it all you want, or you
Yeah.
can actually be a true 2A ambassador. But here's the kicker:
Yeah.
that actually requires a modicum of diplomacy.
Yeah. And there are people out there on both sides, or I guess you could say all sides of the political spectrum, because there's more than two sides, that cannot separate
Mhm.
their political views, their worldviews from everything that they do.
Yeah.
And if someone has a different political view or worldview from them, then they are evil and they must be crushed and destroyed.
Yep.
And you could go to a situation where you've not violated anything in the workplace. Okay. You got caught carrying at work. Okay. If that's a thing that's against workplace policy, that's an easy thing to terminate somebody over.
Mhm.
But suppose you were staying within your workplace policy, but someone found out you're in this lifestyle and they decided that to become a reason to crush you.
Yeah.
They got all
It's
the justification in
yeah.
their mind that they need. And if anybody follows you with a microscope, they can find some reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it, is that I'm fortunate in that I have never really been surrounded by like-minded people. Like the
Mhm.
school that I went to when I grew up was a yuppie Wonder Bread prep school in the DC area, where every other student was the child of a diplomat or a politician. Um, when I went to college, same thing. Despite the fact that I went to college in the South, Tulane at large is a relatively blue political spectrum, because like a third of the campus is from Long Island. Um,
Yeah.
but
Tulane's in the South. That's not a Southern university.
no, it's not. But you know what? I hold a very high honor of graduating from a college in New Orleans in only 4 years. So
Yeah.
um, and so it's just all of that has exposed me to a lot of people in
Mhm.
various different social spheres and subcultures that if I stuck exclusively to the gun world, I wouldn't necessarily have interacted with
Yeah.
to the same degree. And it has made it incredibly valuable, because when I'm having these conversations with some of these gateway students who have approached me because of various things, and I had one of them who commented on, despite the fact that they are looking to get a handgun for personal protection and possibly a carry permit and all of this, they were still of the opinion that it was, quote, too easy to get a handgun in Texas. The fact that there was no training component required. Like, okay,
Mhm.
let's talk about that. And so we're sitting down after the range session, like, I absolutely understand conceptually where you're coming from here. And all I had to do was frame a couple of things and tie it back to their circumstance, showing them how easily those mechanisms can be weaponized against people. I was like, huh,
Mhm.
I never thought of that. But it was simply the fact that I had a base level understanding of who they were as a person and some idea of what their life experience was like. I was able to tie this back and make it relevant to them, as opposed to simply chanting "shall not be infringed,"
Mhm.
which now they have a better understanding. They're less inclined to be as sympathetic to you know proposed feel good type legislation and stuff like that, because it's one of the most valuable things that I got from some of the more sort of uh, touchy feely folks that I'm connected with, is when I started framing the idea of concealed carry and self-defense at large as nothing more than an extension of boundary enforcement and bodily autonomy, you would be astounded at how many seemingly non or anti-gun people are able to start wrapping their mind around the concept when you frame it that way.
Yep.
Because again, just because we all speak English doesn't mean we're speaking the same language.
That is correct. That's correct. And I think that sums it up. I think that's probably a good place to say, you know what, folks, that hit the whole thing. We've been going a little over an hour at
Yeah.
this point. Alex, tell people about your website, how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. So
I take them, I just did it again.
how many times do we need to say Gel House so that way people are drinking about that instead?
Oh, well, now I got to take a swig. So.
Yeah, so the Suited Shootist, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Technically, I'm on TikTok. I've got a Patreon, so if folks want a little bit more in-depth, we do some stuff in there about actual like style consultation, gear integration. We talk about some of the more sensitive topics that don't necessarily need to be subject to the internet at large and the opinions of anybody with an internet connection. So yeah, that's where you can find me. And then again, on the day job, I'm working with GAT Marketing. So whether it is a firearms company or anybody in an industry that gets suppressed by Google, Meta, etc., we specifically focus on marketing services for those types of industries. So be more than happy to help out folks on that front as well.
Cool. I have purposely kept this show in the very deep end of the swimming pool, so that we avoid the drive-by comments. Typically don't get any of that from the podcast feed. Occasionally somebody will find the YouTube feed. Occasionally. But because we stay with the topics that we stay with, most shows are an hour and a half long and everything. It's not like it's a 30-second video somebody can watch on Facebook and jump in and comment. But man, I'm finding that whole just general population shallow end of the pool on the internet just to be not a place I want to be. I have really withdrawn from a lot of that.
Absolutely, yeah. There's only a handful of gun groups that I'm even a part of anymore, let alone active in for the exact same reason.
Yeah.
So I definitely can sympathize there.
Yeah. All right, man. I appreciate you jumping in, and I hope we give some
Absolutely.
people some food for thought.
Fingers crossed.
On this topic, because again, folks, I will say this: everybody that gets into the whole teaching side of it has visions of being the big name traveling instructor that everybody flocks to their classes. The biggest need in the firearms training world is competent entry level classes. You're not going to make a lot of money doing it. It's and I don't have range access to do it. I don't have a tie-in with a gun shop that's going to be feeding people my way and all that kind of thing. And the market kind of forced me into kind of doing the traveling thing.
Yeah.
The biggest need out there is for folks that are teaching people, okay, this is a firearm.
Well, and that's the other reason why everything that I've got set up does not require a range facility. It is designed to be done in the comfort of somebody's living room. So, again, it's one less barrier to entry. Because that's another thing that, again, tying it all back, that we lose sight of is, especially given the A-type personalities and law enforcement military, there's a certain expectation or being accustomed to somewhat austere training environments that are not necessarily conducive to adult learning of brand new motor skills.
Yeah. Oh man, we could do so much better with lots and lots and lots of dry work before we ever do live firing. But again, that doesn't sell, at least for the traveling, or the people that are trying to make them. You know what? a 4-hour block on how to draw the pistol from the holster with a blue gun.
Yep.
It'd actually be pretty effective as far as conveying the information.
Mhm.
Um,
And credit where credit's due, one of the main drivers for the way I built this was one of your first episodes that you did with Hearn about the fact that we shoot too much in gun classes.
Yep.
So
Yep.
thank you for that. You had a major input.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You know, I've had this conversation with several people recently that talk about we give X number of rounds to our training program for, you know, whatever, as far as like a new officer program or whatever. Okay. I could take that same amount of time and cut about half that ammo out and accomplish the same thing that you're accomplishing, but
Yep.
cool. Yeah, the volume of rounds that are fired downrange has nothing. It's not a predictor of success.
Right.
It's not a predictor of translation of skill. And I see people saying, just turning money into noise and not picking up the skill that they're trying to
No.
pick up.
And I'm sure it's even worse when the individual that is
Yeah.
turning money into noise is not the one that actually stroked the check for the ammo.
Right. And, you know, it was in my previous employer existence, you know, when are we going to the range? Will you give me some ammo so I can go shoot? How about you come to my office and we'll do some dry work? Oh, I don't want to do that. I want to go shoot. Okay, we'll go to the range. I'll give you 200 rounds, but you're going to go to the range with me and one of the other instructors. You're going to be coached for that entire 200 rounds. You're going to shoot a series of drills that build on each other. Oh, no, I just want to go shoot. I'm
Don't
not going
work
to play
like that.
along with that. You know,
Yeah.
but oh well. That could get jumped off on a whole nother 45-minute conversation here in a minute. And I have freshmen that are blowing up my phone that I need to go deal with.
All right.
And
Well, let's
you've
get
taken
back
an
to
hour
it.
and a half out of your Sunday evening. So
Good seeing you, and I'll see you in Dallas.
maybe.
That's right. You're up in the air.
Yeah, with the job change, we haven't scheduled that far out. So I don't know if I'm
Gotcha.
going to be able to swing it this year.
All right.
But
Well, fingers crossed.
yeah, I'm hoping so. I am kind of looking at if I can't make it for the whole thing, maybe flying out Saturday morning and flying home Sunday evening. But that kind of goes back to the conversation we had pre-air,
Yep.
and I don't know about that. In the previous existence, that would not have been an issue. I'll do that now. That's kind of a thing. All right. Well, everyone, Alex, appreciate you coming and dropping in tonight, and to the audience who understand that your most important asset is your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with us.